Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Ben.
Great to be here.
We've got a lot to run through today. I think this is the biggest podcast I've ever run, 3 of you all in one. So thanks for taking out the time. I know, you've got lots of things to be working on yourselves in startup world right now, right? So I appreciate the time you've carved out for me. I'll just obviously let anyone listening or watching know that Rich is potentially going to have to jump off shortly. So we'll try and get as much out, squeeze as much juice from Rich before he has to go. But let's go. I've got a lot I want to run through with you today. So I guess let's start with the business. So carbonx Data and Marketing, a new venture, and recently hit the market, I think probably a month or two in now, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, we launched just in mid-September. So obviously it's been in consideration in our heads and discussions for a bit longer than that. But yeah, the official launch was right around middle of September.
Nice. So tell me, how did the business come to be? You said it's kind of been something that's been discussed for a while. Talk me through that process.
Obviously, the three of us have known each other for quite a while, as well as, I guess, having been around the Salesforce ecosystem and particularly in the kind of marketing and what has now quickly become the data space. I've come from 8 years within kind of the Salesforce side of the partner management, looking at kind of the ebbs and flows of the ecosystem. The way I've always seen it is things kind of go in these 3 to 4 year kind of peaks and troughs. And largely it's around great new organizations starting up, building really rapidly, delivering great success for customers, growing well with Salesforce and kind of the license trends and product expansions that they see, and then going through a slew of very quick acquisitions. Then you have the acquisitions, depending on what the kind of acquiring parent company and kind of the match between, I guess, the smaller company joining the parent, how well that integration is run, cultural matches, and then also like the earnout terms for the founders, then can often see a bit of disruption either happen during the integration process or kind of at the completion of the earnout and the full integration. Sometimes, unfortunately, things not actually going all that well. And with human capital businesses, like coming from the tech side of things, the tech's the tech regardless of who's working at the company. But when you're talking about consulting services, it's entirely about the people that are employed on that project. And so what we saw was a big kind of gap in change. There was a huge slew of acquisitions, big set of changes coming through, but then also a lot of bleeding edge new tech where the three of us had, I guess what I'd say, a unique advantage and insight from coming from the vendor that really saw an opportunity to go into the market and bring a new offering through to clients with pretty unique and special kind of competitive edge on intel from our previous roles at Salesforce.
And obviously, you were all at Salesforce, but Salesforce now is a beast, right? There's so many employees there. How closely were you all working? Like how aligned were you in terms of knowing how each person operates and things like that?
I was probably quite separate, even though we knew each other very well and have known each other very well for quite a few number of years in the pro services side of the business. You know, ProServe kind of works in ProServe in a bit of a silo, but loosely connected to AEs. Whereas, I mean, in a strange way, Calp and Vlad were kind of competitors, but internally. I'll let you boys explain that.
Yeah, I guess I know Ian and we worked side by side for a few years in the recent time because we've both been in the alliances stream. But I think we crossed paths with Rich when I was still in professional services to a degree, and then later when I moved into alliances. So we kind of had a bit of a overlap over the times. But to be honest, I think I guess I treated like me and Ian were more or less partners for a couple of last years. Rich was, as he said, almost on the other side of the fence because, we were trying to accelerate the ecosystem while Rich was really equipped and tasked with a job to get the professional services growing.
Makes sense. And I know, having started a business myself, and at the time I started with a business partner, so I know the journey of like we've got this idea, but the probably one of the most important things is aligning on where that idea goes and like the vision for the future. So how did that conversation start around like there's a gap, but this is what we want to do with it, and making sure everyone's on the same page, because that's key, right? That you're going in the same direction, not just 6, 12, 18 months, but right into the future.
If I think about probably where the initial idea came from its inception, I was actually recruited by a few partners within the ecosystem looking to have me fill some roles. I ended up seeking some advice on that from an ex-leader, and what he had proposed was basically to to give me and the opportunity to do it for myself rather than join something else, kind of align into some capital to get the business up and running. As I was then considering those decisions, because like I still continue to love Salesforce all through my 8 years there, like leaving the relative safety of the mothership was a big question in my head. And both Rich and Vlad were actually two of the people that I had independently actually sought counsel from. Like I obviously Rich comes from not just the ecosystem, but then also running the Salesforce side and in-house teams all around the consulting services that we now offer. And then obviously there's nobody in the ecosystem that has a better kind of pulse on the technical capabilities and what's needed and what works and what doesn't than Vlad. So as I said, two good kind of long-time colleagues and friends sought a bit of advice, and then it kind of became well, how would you do that? And then I think, as we continued through the discussions, it then kind of merged into the three of us wanting to go and actually start this together. There's probably two big things that really helped us feel really confident going into this. The first was the three of us actually went and spent 2 days offsite. Rich kindly hosted us up at his house, and we ran through absolutely everything you can think of. What's the business plan? What would the roles and responsibilities be? How would we divvy up which roles get hired into which team? What would the structure be? What's the immediate round of growth? What would the future growth look like? And then the secondary piece that actually happened a little bit before and after that offsite was to seek some guidance from others that had walked this path before us. In my role particularly, I'd spent a lot of time with many of those founders that had built successful businesses, sold them, and then finished their earnout, were enjoying time on their boats and taking their families to Europe and the like. But getting some coaching and guidance from them to say, like, what were your learnings? If you were to do it again, what would you do differently? And like some of the simplest things, like, well, one good friend had started a business with one business partner. When there's two people and there's a disagreement, it's kind of hard to find a tiebreaker. And so one of his comments was, the fact there's three of us, you're already off on the right foot, because as long as everyone's okay to losing a vote 2-1 every now and again, you'll be fine.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's so true. Actually, that's a good piece of advice. And I guess even the fact that you spent time together is so key, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. You don't really know someone until you spend time with them. We were just talking about off camera about having people stay with you over Christmas. I've got my family staying here, so you learn a lot, right, when you're with people and you've got 48 hours or whatever to spend in someone's company that you wouldn't naturally anyway. You definitely can see how you can collaborate and how you might, little things might annoy you or stuff like that. So definitely a good plan.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a therapy session for me. It was like in the sense of I think one of the good advice was across all of them was, talk about your individual preferences, personalities, the clashes, and how you're going to solve them. And I think one of the big things, because I did have few like previous experiences kind of working with people, is everything is great. It's easy, but when things get hard, that's when the natural sort of adjustment kind of personalities come in play. And if you haven't sort of had an agreement ahead of the time, how we're going to deal with that, then it becomes a difficult point and it can derail the business. So we going to spend deliberately a bit of a time talking through what do we do when things do not go right and how do we handle that. And I think to me it was really great. I'm just kind of washing through our dirty laundries and kind of agreeing like, okay, what do we do here? How do we work? How do we not work? And how do we click and not click? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've been told that now. I never got that advice up front. And fortunately, the person I started the business with is still one of my best friends. But we didn't have like a shareholders agreement, and we didn't discuss, well, what happens if there's conflict or what happens if we have disagreement. And we didn't really. It kind of ended like in a good way. But that's such key advice. And I think anyone listening to this that actually does want to go down that path of being a partner founder in a partnership, like that's a really important thing. It's like, how do we get through any difficult discussions, and like what's the framework that we'll use to move forward if that does come up.
Yeah. And having that, honestly, you can be the best of friends, and we are, right? We've known each other a long time, but you still need the legalities, because if anything ever happens and you don't have that legality to fall back on, everything falls apart. And not just then the business, but the friendships and whatever else, right? So we were very diligent about, we all trust each other. That's why we're doing this. But let's make sure we've got the frameworks and the business set up in the right way and all those such things. And that was also some great advice we got.
Mm-hmm. So you've all got different strengths, and I think that's obviously what interested you all about coming together. But how do you divvy up responsibilities, and how are you ensuring that there's accountability to get things done? Because there's a lot to get done right in the early days.
Totally. I think very early on, we started calling ourselves the Three-Legged Stool, because, a stool doesn't stand up without all three legs. And there was a really nice analogy, Calp. I think you came up with it, and we just ran with it because it was great. But, to your point, we are a really nice Venn diagram of overlapping but differentiating skills that make up the business. To Calp's point before, in regards to my background in ProServe, but as well as consulting businesses, previous partners that I've helped run, and then being a customer of Salesforce, that is a very niche area, let's say, that always benefited me while I was in ProServe. But then my background is marketing strategy, go-to-market strategy, and those types of things. So that's how I kind of carved out the piece that I was like, okay, here's how I really want to own this and work in this space, as well as a lot of overlap in sales, let's say, over the past 4 or so years while at Salesforce, supporting the AP team and the AE team. So that's kind of my piece, let's say, and how we've divvied that up.
Yeah, I took the technical side of that, of the things. I guess we had a bit of an overlap with Rich because he was in ProServe and I was in ProServe. But my sort of focus was more technology and like architecture, data, integrations, all of that sort of stuff. I get really excited about challenging problems and solving them. So that was kind of like, okay, if I'm coming in, then I'll look into how do we solve technical problems, what technologies we work with, what platforms we're going to be delivering on, and so forth. So I kind of took both internally and externally, I guess, like bespoke support for all the guys. Like, hey, you've got the problem with Chrome. Let me help you out with that, right? But and then practically for our delivery as well, like we've got someone who's I'm hoping can provide that comfort and assurance for customers that we know what we do, we know the tech, and looking into even sharing it broadly in a sense of educating customers, because one big thing that we really sort of hype about is adoption and ensuring that our clients can take over what we do. So it's really knowledge share, education, mentoring, coaching. That was my driver.
Yeah, probably contextually a phrasing or kind of set of terms that a long-time friend, colleague, mentor, leader of mine has always used is this idea of you have roles about working for the business and working on the business. And so when you think about in our world, working for the business is what is the billable offer that we can bring to a client? And obviously you've got, from Vlad's perspective, like incredible wealth of knowledge around architecture, data, planning, how to run a technical program. Rich is obviously much more on kind of the experience side of things, as well as actually selling the services is that kind of for the business. But then when you look at on the business, it's like, well, how should we run our own business? What pieces of technology should we invest in? How do we make sure that that's integrated to best practice? Because I think with any type of sale, drinking your own champagne is the best way. Like, well, this is how we use it, and here's how you can use it. Versus like some other like Salesforce partners that are out there selling Salesforce but run themselves on HubSpot. And so like we really have come from this like drink your own champagne and know what not only you can do for the clients, but then how we each internally kind of divide up our own skills. And like, well, their backgrounds are kind of very distinct and kind of natural to the business. We've started, mine's far more been based in, I actually started as a finance nerd. I've done a lot of distribution channel strategy roles across telco as well as IT. But a big part of what I did through all of those was actually help define business cases. Like, what is the actual output you're going to get from this investment in technology? And doing that through telco across marketing teams, customer contact, sales teams, to then say, well, is the capital or the OpEx expenditure actually going to deliver a measurable return? And how do you put a framework in place to be able to actually then go back to your board, your stakeholders to say, we spent X and we got Y. How good are we? And I think that's been one of the biggest issues that we've seen, particularly since COVID, where there was this flood to just buy applications. Oh my gosh, everyone's locked at home. We need to buy more tech to make their experience better. But they kind of lost their way about why they were buying it. It lost its place within the kind of enterprise-wide architecture because things were being bought for point solutions within individual business units. And now that we've kind of come through quite a tough economic year, everyone's scratching their heads as to, well, we bought this thing and it's either not plugged in or Why is it only working for these people over here? And so I think that's a big part of the kind of premise upon which we, I guess, have brought this to market. You can bring the strategy, the technology, and then the commercial rigor and accuracy as to whether it's actually delivering an output for your business at a time where it's really what everyone's scratching their head about. At the same time, there's this huge AI-shaped tsunami coming for them. And so they're kind of stuck between these two worlds of like legacy tech debt. Is it fit for purpose? And how do we make sure that we're part of this generative AI wave and we don't start losing space to our competitors who are maybe adopting it or putting it into place a bit sooner?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually when you each describe your roles, it's very clear that you've obviously got very different strengths, but like you said, they overlap really well. And you actually need all of the strengths that you bring to the table to run this business. But if you were a sole founder, you'd probably each need to hire in these skills quite quickly to be effective. So it works nicely, right? It kind of all fits together. Even down to the finance background, right? You need that kind of finance mind around making smart decisions in the early days. So that's awesome. And there are a lot of partners in the ecosystem, though, right? So there's, like you said, there's loads out there. Some have been acquired in the past. Some acquisitions have been successful, and some haven't. How did you sit down and go, right, we don't just want to be another partner. We want to be different. Like we need to differentiate ourselves. We need something that other partners aren't doing and can't do.
I think as probably the person who's worked the most with the partner ecosystem and helping work through kind of the various strategies and points of differentiation. Like even Salesforce went through pendulum swings. It's like, well, everybody just needs to know a certain cloud when it was just like sales service platform and a little bit of like social marketing. And then it became everybody needs to know every cloud. And then it swung back to now you only need to know an industry. And then it swung back to you only need to know a specific set of clouds and industries, but we also want you to know everything. And so it has been an interesting shift, but also like Salesforce's complexity has exploded indefinitely. And I've always kind of looked at this three-sided Rubik's Cube around like you've got a product, you've got an industry, and then you've got kind of a customer size. Because like there is a huge amount of partners. I think there'd probably be close to 500 active in Australia and New Zealand alone. But what percentage of those are actually designed to work with SMBs? There's probably 60% of them. If you then look at the very top end, like, yes, Telstra, ANZ Bank, CommBank probably employ 50% of the consulting capacity within the country, and everybody has a footprint in there. But the reality is that vast majority of that workload and therefore the kind of people capacity lives within an Accenture, a Deloitte, or somebody in this kind of global natured scale. Where we've really targeted is bringing the kind of experience of Vlad taught everybody at the GSIs how to use a lot of these tools. They've got their own wealth of experience, but from a technical standpoint, like he was the source of truth for the top end consultancies. Rich had been running all the strategy for Salesforce internally, which is defined best practice. And so how do we take that amazing enterprise level experience, but then actually offer that more to the mid-market? Because that's the space that we see, A, lot of growth in Salesforce, but then also B, it's the people at the top aren't really set up commercially with their $4,000 a day man-day rates to flex down into those customers and actually also not run 6-month projects, but do more value-based iterative sprints. So it'll be 6 weeks at a time to then earn your next 6 weeks. But at the same time, those companies do come with themselves a level of complexity and maturity that a lot of the SMB partners aren't really set up to deliver to yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it was like the big thing that we talked about. Yeah, besides the product knowledge and that sort of discussion around do we become a SME, do we become generalist and do everything to everyone? Kind of focus on things that we're really strong players in. We know, certain domains, and we would like to kind of build up on that. But at the same time, extending into I guess, given with the transition of current world into value-driven outcomes. So instead of counting and saying we're going to do it 6 weeks, we're going to do it 8 weeks, we're going to have 5 people or 50 people, get to the point that we can enable a certain business outcome for your company. What's worth for you? And we looked into that. If we can become smarter to deliver it, we make it market at competitive pricing. And it leads us to really give customers something that they usually see as like a very heavy IT-centric projects to become like, hey, we would like to enable the tech that you bought and make sure that you equip with all the necessary skills and tools to run it ongoing without us being there for full time, unless you need us, kind of thing. And I think that was our mentality, and we sort of see that resonates well so far. So time will tell, I guess.
Gents, on that note, I apologize. I'm going to put on my other hat. It's best dad joke ever. And go and do something else. I'll see you shortly.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Wright.
That actually leads me nicely into the next question that I wanted to discuss, because you're part of a bigger group, right? So you have your specialisms, but then you're part of a bigger group that also does some other Salesforce work outside of that. So what was the decision process behind that and going into the carbonx group rather than being a standalone partner that turns up and delivers just what you do?
I guess I'll have a first pass, and then Vlad, you can extend. As I looked at it, what was a tough year for the consulting ecosystem and for a lot of the Australian and global economy, one of the biggest things that we saw happening was people that are organizations that had basically scaled up for not just, I guess, the amount of work happening, but then the assumption that that amount of work through COVID was going to continue on forever. And that was going to be the capacity demand for brands for all time. And seeing the capacity squeeze as they've all then had to, unfortunately, let some people go because they need to balance their own books if they don't have work to put those billable resources onto. And a lot of the kind of bootstrapped organizations, even good friends that we're working with and partnering today, that are doing that pathway, you're stuck between two things to actually be able to resource human capital projects. It's either you need to take some punts to hire some people full time to get the right people, get them in, keep them sticky, and keep the quality of your product consistent, which is a massive risk on cash. Or you go to some form of offshore or kind of support service where you can buy on a kind of daily or an hourly rate, provides a lot more commercial flexibility, but way less control on the quality of those resources and also when they're available. So when we look at kind of the carbonx group, which is also part of Bearlate, which is Asia's #1 Salesforce partner, been around for about 15 years, it was actually a natural choice. So my own personal relationships back with kind of all the various levels of that group is there's a period where I was running the resale channel for Asia Pacific at Salesforce. They still are our largest reseller. I still say our because I'm bleeding blue and wearing a blue shirt. But they are still the biggest reseller and kind of #1 rated partner, keep winning the Partner Year awards. And so I know basically their CEO, have so for probably 7 or 8 years, and have an incredible amount of respect and understanding for kind of the sustainability of their business. And so being able to trust and know that the teams that we're tapping into, where we do need to leverage some offshore resources, like the average tenure is like 6 or 7 years. Like it's not a transactional market like it has been in Australia, where everyone will leave for another kind of 5 or 10K pay rise. The quality of the tenure and also the depth of knowledge and the proven experience that that team have that we now have immediate access to, of which there's over 1,000 people across their wider group. And then when we bring that into the kind of extended carbonx group, which is effectively taking Bearlate Thailand out to the rest of Southeast Asia and ANZ, the group CEO is the gentleman that I was the COO for about 5 or 6 years at Salesforce, Charles Woodall. We spent a lot of time on planes. He turned left, I turned right, but we got to travel and spend many, many years traveling and solving a lot of these problems and getting exposure to, I guess, the trials and tribulations and successes of partners just like ours. So yeah, that kind of top to bottom trust that we have, and then obviously being able to start it with Vlad and Rich, who have got obviously a huge amount of respect and time for. Has kind of led into us avoiding a lot of the woes that a lot of bootstrap businesses are having to go into, and allowing us to scale and kind of realize that dream of bringing sustainability into tech stacks much, much quicker.
Yeah. And I only probably add to that is just one thing is when I was doing like partner education and enablement and coaching, I was lucky enough to meet the team in Thailand when I was doing a few sessions in Thailand. So I really, I've got really good feel and memories in terms of competency of consultants, their curiosity. And I mean, they're not the only people, obviously. There are other talented people across even Southeast Asia. But it was just the confidence and comfort of the fact that it's a skilled team with a good experience, with a good tenure. So they're not switching the job just because someone offers a little bit more. which helps us tremendously to look at them as partners rather than just a traditional offshore model where we just throw people in. Get to know them, we get to work with them. I'm supporting them on some of the initiatives they do today for customers. And even now, we've been sort of 3 months in, it's already some of the conversation around how do you coach people, they reach out for career advice, what to do next, what to learn next, which to me is really, really empowering. But as Ian said, it gives us an advantage that we don't have to immediately grow up our business here until we get a bit more financially stable in that sense. Because, to be honest, as we kind of spoke about that, when we spend that time together, we actually thought through what our year 1, 2, and 3 would look like, not just the first 30, 60, 90 days. And we did discuss how do we start building the collective here on shore, like what group in the ANZ would look like, and how do we then grow up across our Southeast Asia markets too.
Yeah, nice. And obviously, as you've both mentioned, you've been on the other side for a long time, right? You've worked with a lot of partners, and you've kind of seen it from the Salesforce side. So what was it that, if anything, surprised you about the process of becoming a partner and when you jumped across to the partner world?
It would be fair to say there wasn't much of a surprise. We knew it, we've done it. Do you know, it was funny because when I was discussing it with my manager before leaving, I actually did share one thought, and I said, it's going to be interesting me going up into the ecosystem because everything I've been preaching for the last 7 years or so, I'm going to be actually putting into practice. And, that's going to be a test of truth and seeing it through standing up, the test of time. And is it actually true what you've been telling us, right? Because, to your point, we've done a lot of education, and I think part of my role was evolved over the years drastically, but we've done a fair bit of consultancy to partners in terms of, how do you build your go-to-market capabilities? How do you structure your teams? What's the process from start to end, building up that consulting space in the Salesforce ecosystem around our products and offerings? And I feel a lot of that knowledge helps us to accelerate decisions because we've seen it, we've done it, we know what good looks like, and we know what good doesn't look like when you go wrong sort of pathway. So to me, that was like, it feels like everything we've done so far, we've learned and we coach, stands the test, at least up until now. I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, I think we laugh on a lot of our weekly stand-ups at, like, under every rock there's something to do, and when you look around, and, like, thankfully there's 3 of us to divide that thing to do. But, like, after having come from quite large organizations and running decent-sized teams, where it's more like directing traffic in a very high traffic environment, as we come out to start an entirely new brand, there's been a lot of like, well, it's just me here in my office staring at my screen and I've got to do this thing. And so, like, for me, it's been a big change in, like, operating rhythm of, like, kind of blocking and tackling and tasks and prioritizing and sending, to then actually sitting down and going, well, I'm going to go create something for the next 2 hours, which has been a really nice shift for my mind, but definitely an adjustment. And I think, like, I obviously worked closely with the ecosystem from the vendor side, but, like, my background is not in IT or tech project delivery. Like, that's what Vlad and Rich have done their entire careers. My background has much more been kind of internal management, consulting, advisory, commercial strategy. And so I'm able to bring a lot of those kind of skills and sense of experience to try and solve how we run our own business and how we look at the broader opportunity, and, like, how we help customers size up whether or not investments are actually going to keep their finance team happy, or if they're going to get their business and occasionally go, no, and just throw the requests away. So it's also been a massive learning for myself around just getting exposure to seeing kind of under the hood of a lot of how some of our early programs are going, with obviously Rich and Vlad at the lead on the client edge.
Yeah, nice. I guess that's what you want, though, right? You want that new experience, something completely different to throw yourself into.
Hugely.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to do another podcast at some point about the tech and delivery in this space and in your world of specialism. But the next question is more around, like, what you've had to be mindful of for your own business with the speed that AI is evolving. Because, like, I've been a recruiter for 16 years, and ever since the beginning of recruitment, I was always told that at some point there's not going to be a need for recruiters, right? AI is going to take that need away. And consulting, obviously, I know some people out in the ecosystem are worried about their jobs because they're like, well, if AI can write code for me as a developer, why will I be needed in the future? But actually looking at the lens of AI and thinking how it can enable a consulting company and use it to your benefit internally and how you operate, what have you been mindful of like the early foundations of the business and setting things up in a way that AI can be an enabler rather than something that kind of takes away the need for your services in the future?
I'll maybe start from a commercial standpoint, and then Vlad will have a much more eloquent answer from a technical and a business process standpoint. As I mentioned, kind of there's this kind of like tsunami of AI and tech debt hitting customers. I think the same thing is happening both to the tech consulting landscape as well as the vendor footprint themselves. Like I remember speaking to, would have been a colleague of Rich's in one of the much more technical product sets, basically saying that he didn't think the team that he led internally at Salesforce was going to last much longer because it was such we just need developers to go and kind of click some buttons to do things because that's just how the tool is required. As software gets better at doing the simple button clicking, the need for that kind of capacity, both in the talent pool, but then also the project cost is either going to shift to increased license cost, decreased implementation cost, or a combination of the two. And so we've been very, very conscious, and Vlad touched on this earlier, about like we don't want retainers for low level work. Like we don't want to be lofting lots and lots of bodies of offshore work to basically be doing simple kind of low value coding or configuration that we know is eventually going to become redundant. What we want is to be focusing on business centric value and pushing clients to that next wave of customer experience or KPI achievement that they're going for, and finding the smartest way to get the tech to do enough of it itself. And if you look at some of like the larger, particularly Indian, like offshore service, like the kind of Twitch players, like I've got big questions about what's going to happen to that business model over the next 5 and 10 years, because their business model is so heavily based on skilled but low cost scale offshore resources. And so as technology starts to replace some of those, I think any consulting organization that is making heyday on selling those low cost mass scale bodies is going to be massively challenged. And then I've got another thought about what the education system has to do to prepare people to miss those early years of button clicking to then get into senior, mid-senior and senior roles, but that might be for another day.
Yeah, I'd probably kind of extend that, because I think to me, the part of the AI, of course, one of the things is like to look into the delivery process. Like a lot of the simplified discussion go back to coding. I used to do programming and coding for a reasonably long time before joining Salesforce. And I do remember from all those days, the coding is about 20% of the work that you do. There's a lot of other smart things they have to do as a developer, as an engineer, as an architect going forward. So I actually look at that as it's a great opportunity for people to think about their careers and what they want to be doing in the future. If we take away the repetitive automated task and think about scale becoming not just an entry point job, but scale is a tool, then what's the entry point job is? I think that will be a big question that we all as an industry have to come up and as an answer, figure out how do we support students. I mean, I've got 2 kids coming up into, like late years of school, and I worry about their education and their careers, and kind of thinking through they're stepping in the world full of automation. And again, this is not idealistic yet, because all these AI tools are still young and immature, and the processes around them yet to be built and defined. But refinement will come through, as any adoption of any technology have proven us so far is it take 5-10 years and this will become a norm. So what can we look at as this is where you start your career, and these are the things you're going to do. I feel excited about an opportunity for people to become a bit more technically savvy, understand business, understand use cases, and become really, it was not my term, I really like that direction of thinking, is where you become almost like a constructor or executor or orchestrator, where you tell other businesses or other people how to connect these different tools and dots to get the business outcomes that they need. Because A, you understand what the business needs are, what drives the business value, and B, you have a good understanding of technology underneath the hood, how it works and what it does. So you can connect the dots and actually say, okay, the tools will do that. This is how they need to be combined together. So you're really doing a high level design, sort of architecture, use case refinement and formulation. They're the skills that are not easy to come by. And to me, this is really a requirement of investing upfront from education standpoint of view. So what do you learn at unis and before you get into the workforce? And then we, as a future employees for others, as well as other partners and anyone else in the industry, how do we help to build a pathway for people to start somewhere and effectively coach and mentor them to become experts in that field?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting point. He's back. You mentioned about like children and education and AI, because I heard this thing a while back, and it's like, how do we teach children to want to think now? Because and to think critically, because they don't need to have to think anymore, because you can chat GPT has the answers, right? So why will they want to come up with a solution when there's already a solution on hand? And it's a really interesting thought as to how you encourage and coach that from an early age so that people have those skills that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I compare it with Google Map. We sometimes don't really think about that too much, but take someone today and drop them in the car somewhere in the middle of nowhere and you need to get from here to Melbourne to Sydney without Google Maps. Like, not a lot of people today will be like, oh yeah, that's fine, I'll just go and drive, because there are signs and there is that, and you can go and ask people. We must live in the world that is heavily augmented by these little tools that became such a norm of our life. And that's what I was kind of implying, that when refinement of technology will make it so seamless in our world that we're just going to be used to that. And I think that question is, as you said, like, inspiring thinking is really, really big thing. I'm seeing a lot of sort of consulting companies talk to me in the last maybe couple of years where they said, like, it's a bit boring that people don't actually want to invest in their careers. It's almost like everyone wants to find the shortcut. I like to compare it when someone reach out for help and they come and ask me a question. So I look at the question, the way you styled it and frame your question. Do you ask for, how do I do that? Or come and say, hey, I'm trying to do that. These are the things I've tried. Like, what else can I do?
Mm-hmm.
They're two different pathways. And you can see someone who's trying to come and say, you're skillful in knowing that stuff, so you can help me to get an answer in 5 minutes. I don't want to do any job to actually try and source it myself.
Yeah.
And I do remember, like, one of my colleagues used to have that, let me Google it for you website. It was like one of the favorite things, like, hey, let me send you the link that will answer this question for you. So yeah. I feel very much like that these days.
100%.
I think back even just to like a lot of the leadership training that kind of received over the years, and they always talk about like taming the big hairy advice monster. It's like advice is the worst thing that you can give a team or anybody that you're trying to help mentor or grow. And I don't think that's something that AI is going to really be designed to do well. Like Google search is there for search, ChatGPT search is there for search, or soon to be, and it's just all about regurgitating something as opposed to actually helping somebody develop on that journey. Mm-hmm. And I think, you think about how much coaching and training has taken humans to try to adapt that way, because if you just become the answer, you will always be the answer, and there will be no ability to find their own answer. But to Vlad's point, if you're actually teaching them the critical thinking and the problem solving process, everything gets better. And so I think that same approach on like making the people beneath you or above you, if they kind of do the upside down org chart, like the people within your kind of team or your responsibility, make them 5-10% better every day, then the scale and capacity of what they're able to do is better. The question then becomes, as AI accelerates everybody, does that actually shrink everybody down to being dumber? Or does it actually generally accelerate the pace of society? Or does it land somewhere in the middle where you get society accelerated, but people don't have to work 60-hour weeks anymore?
Yeah, it's so true. This final one is, I guess, like vision for the future. And you kind of touched on what you don't want to be, and to some degree what you do want to be, and where your niche is, and where you're going to add value. But I know you don't want like retained kind of managed services work. You don't want to be a kind of base level, let's build you a solution and off you go. What do you want to be? What, like, if you look at that 3-year plan that you mentioned you discussed, where do you want to take the business, and what does the business look like to you in those 3 years?
That's a good one.
Maybe I'll jump in real quick. I'm probably going to repeat half of what you've just said about not being retainers, but hey, I got to get some mic time back, right? I think the interesting thing for us is like that call that I just went away and came back from, the customer was blown away because they were like, oh, this all looks amazing, but what about if we wanted to do this again in 3 months' time? And I was like, well, our business model here is that while we build this for you and while we do this for you, we will take the journey of being able to do it yourself. But in 3 months' time, if you say, we want to do this again, but we want to take it to the next level, we really want to scale this up, that's when you would come back to us and we would help you take it up a level. But if you want to continue to do it at this level, which would be the best practice level, you could do that yourself, right? And so I think as we see in 3 years' time, we want to be at that absolute cutting edge of, we have all of our customers that are continuing to do their day in, day out that we've shown them, trained them, given the ability to do themselves, but we are pushing them to that next step, that next AI piece or whatever it may be. I was talking to a customer on Wednesday about, imagine someone walks into your store and at some point in the future, definitely not now, still very creepy, but we're going to have facial recognition and it's going to be acceptable that you walk into a store, it recognizes your face, and someone comes over and says, "Oh, Mr. Wright, here's all your information," and they know everything about me, right? But that isn't possible without things like data cloud, connecting all the data together, facial recognition, putting all that so yeah, I'm not saying that's where we want to be. Like I said, it's a bit creepy yet, but
You're going to get kicked out of Bunnings.
yeah, exactly. But that's where we want to be, right? We want to be on the absolute bleeding edge of tech, and for me, the customer experience, the strategy side of things, for Vlad, the tech side of things, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I think when it comes back to that, if we think about like how big the team grows, what our revenues are, like probably actually won't be the biggest business. Like I by traditional measures, bodies times rate equals revenue and growth. Like we'd actually prefer to be more kind of small to mid-size, but be helping our customers achieve more, helping them do more themselves, rather than building out 10-person teams to keep the lights on for some pretty basic tools. Like unless like some organizations, like that's part of their strategy. They're going to have enough internal resource, but they're always going to have some level of kind of retained services. And like, we're happy to play that role. But what we will never do is push that upon a client. We would always much prefer enable them to drive their own future, us to provide the advice, guidance, break fix when they hit the kind of edge of their knowledge, and through that process raise their knowledge, but at the same time actually be spending time on what's next.
Yeah, and I'll probably add to that. I think we'll look at from the customer side. It's sort of like that's no-brainer. Like these points that totally resonate. But we were discussing as well, like how do we build the business in a way that it's a destination for the future consultants? Like how do we provide opportunities for people to come, grow, and learn with us, get a best coaching, mentoring, and really give them an option to work on some of the interesting and challenging projects. So they effectively that conversation about someone growing up and becoming more and more senior. While at the same time choosing to stay with us rather than move on. I think that's one of the other big things that we're kind of talking about and planning and thinking to ensure that we incorporate in our business model.
Yeah, nice. It's fascinating, isn't it? Like some of the points you've discussed today around like the scale of organizations overseas and things that potentially aren't going to be needed in the future. Like it is going to be a really interesting space to see unfold over the next few years and see what impact AI has on, these, let's say 100, 150 people, Salesforce practices in Australia. Like, do they kind of exist? Are they different? Are they just doing different things? Are they putting their resources into different areas where there is still need for that scale? It'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks so much. This is just the first part of what we're going to be doing. I know we're going to have a further discussion around the actual tech and the work that you're doing in that space. So we'll have that coming again a bit later than this one. But I really appreciate your time. It's been really, really interesting to hear more about not just the business, but how you've come to some of the decisions you've made and how important it's been to kind of get yourselves together and really discuss that vision and where you see the business going and also how you get through more challenging times.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Thank you for an opportunity. It's been a good experience.
Appreciate it, Ben. Been a pleasure.
I appreciate the time.